I waited 3 hours for people who couldn't spare me 3 minutes. That was the sentence running through my mind as the candles slowly melted into pale puddles across my dining room table on the night I turned 70. I had spent the entire day cooking for my family. Not because anyone asked me to. Not because they expected it. But because somewhere deep inside me, I still believed that if I kept loving them hard enough, they would remember how to love me back. The house smelled like rosemary chicken, buttered rolls, and cinnamon apples by 4 o'clock that afternoon. I had started cooking before sunrise, tying my silver hair into a loose bun while the coffee brewed beside the kitchen window. Outside, the Connecticut sky was soft and gray, the kind of chilly October day that always made me want the house to feel warm and full. I set the dining table for 8 people. 8 ivory plates. 8 cloth napkins folded carefully into neat little triangles. 8 wine glasses polished until they gleamed beneath the chandelier. I even placed handwritten name cards beside every plate, something my late husband Harold used to tease me about. Ellie, he would laugh, our own children know where they sit. But I still did it anyway. Some habits survive grief. Some habits survive loneliness too. By 5:30, everything was ready. The chicken rested beneath foil on the counter. The mashed potatoes stayed warm in the oven. My apple pie cooled beside the sink while vanilla candles flickered gently across the room. I changed into a navy blue sweater dress and put on the pearl earrings Harold gave me on our 40th anniversary. Looking at myself in the hallway mirror, I tried to smile. 70 years old. I never imagined I would feel this invisible by 70. At 6 o'clock, I heard a car outside and my heart lifted so quickly it almost embarrassed me. But the headlights passed by the house without slowing down. I stood there for a moment anyway, hands clasped together like a foolish woman waiting for a miracle. Daniel was usually late. Vanessa always blamed traffic. Lily had soccer practice sometimes. I told myself there were explanations for everything. By 6:30, the food was cooling faster than I could keep it warm. I checked my phone 3 times in 10 minutes. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. The silence inside the house started feeling larger somehow. Too large. The grandfather clock in the living room sounded louder than usual. Tick, tick, tick. Every second stretched painfully across the empty rooms. At 7:15, I finally texted Daniel. Hey sweetheart, is everything okay? I stared at the little message bubble after sending it, watching the screen like a teenager waiting for a prom invitation. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Relief rushed through me so quickly my hands trembled. But it wasn't Daniel calling. It was a text. Sorry, Mom. Something came up. Rain check. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just 2 careless sentences from the boy I once stayed awake 3 nights beside when he had pneumonia at age 7. I lowered myself slowly into my chair at the head of the table. The candles continued burning quietly while steam disappeared from untouched food. I looked around at the empty chairs. Daniel's chair. Vanessa's chair. Lily's chair. Even the little seat I still kept for my grandson Noah, although he was already too old for booster cushions now. The room felt colder by the minute. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was a Facebook notification. Vanessa had posted new photos. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in my chest tightened as I opened the app. The first photo appeared before my eyes like a slap delivered with a perfectly manicured hand. Vanessa stood in the center of a long restaurant table wearing a tight red dress and a birthday sash across her chest. Daniel sat beside her with one arm around her shoulders. Lily smiled into the camera. Noah held up a giant slice of chocolate cake. Everyone was there. Every single person I had been waiting for. The caption read, "Perfect birthday dinner with my favorite people." I stared at the screen so long the words blurred together. In the background of the photo, I could see glowing chandeliers and steaks on oversized white plates. Glasses raised in celebration. My family laughing together while my own birthday. Dinner sat untouched less than 15 miles away. My throat tightened, but strangely, I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there staring at the empty chair across from me, the one Harold used to sit in before the cancer took him 3 years ago. For the first time since losing my husband, The house no longer felt lonely because he was gone. It felt lonely because I was no longer part of the family still living. I sat at the table long after the candles burned out. The house had become so quiet that even the refrigerator humming in the kitchen sounded loud. Outside, cold rain tapped softly against the windows, streaking the glass in thin silver lines. The chicken had gone dry beneath the foil. The mashed potatoes had formed a thin crust on top. The rolls I baked from scratch that morning sat untouched in the basket beside me, still wrapped carefully in the linen towel I embroidered nearly 20 years ago. I do not know how long I stayed there before finally standing up. Time feels strange when your heart has been embarrassed. Slower somehow. Heavier. I carried one plate at a time into the kitchen because suddenly I could not bear seeing all 8 settings together anymore. Every chair felt like proof of something I had spent years refusing to admit. I scraped untouched food into plastic containers while Vanessa's smiling face lingered in my mind like a stain I could not wash away. Perfect birthday dinner with my favorite people. I kept hearing those words over and over. Favorite people. I opened the refrigerator and stared at the crowded shelves, now packed with enough leftovers to feed a family that clearly no longer wanted to gather in my home. Harold used to joke that I cooked like the Great Depression might come back at any moment. Ellie, he would laugh, sneaking pieces of chicken from the pan. You always feed people like you are afraid they will never come home again. Maybe somewhere deep down, I always was. I washed dishes slowly, standing beneath the yellow kitchen light while rain continued falling outside. My hands ached from arthritis more these days, especially when the weather turned cold. 70 changes your body in quiet ways. You become aware of every staircase, every stiff morning, every grocery bag that suddenly feels heavier than it used to. But loneliness changes you differently. Loneliness makes ordinary things feel unnecessary. By midnight, the house looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Clean, organized, silent, as if no celebration had ever been planned at all. I carried my tea into the living room and sat in Harold's old recliner near the fireplace. His reading glasses still rested on the side table beside a half-finished crossword puzzle from 3 years ago. I had never moved them. Some people might think that was unhealthy, but grief is strange. Sometimes leaving one small thing untouched is the only way you convince yourself love was real. My phone buzzed again around 12:30. For one foolish second, I thought maybe Daniel was finally calling. Maybe he realized what they had done. Maybe he felt guilty. But it was only another notification from Facebook. Someone had tagged Vanessa in more photos from the restaurant. I should have ignored it. Instead, I opened every single picture. There they all were beneath glowing chandeliers and warm amber lights. Noah smiling with whipped cream on his nose. Lily leaning against Daniel's shoulder. Vanessa holding a cocktail glass while everyone sang around a chocolate cake covered in sparklers. My eyes drifted to Daniel's face. He looked happy, relaxed, not distracted or apologetic. Not like a man who had forgotten his mother's birthday dinner. A memory surfaced suddenly so clearly it made my chest tighten. 3 years earlier, after Harold's funeral, I had invited everyone over for Sunday dinner because I could not stand how empty the house felt. Vanessa called an hour beforehand and said they could not make it because Noah had a mild cough. Later that night, Lily accidentally posted a photo online from a movie theater downtown. The entire family had gone without me. At the time, I told myself it was not personal. Families get busy. Children forget things. Life moves quickly. But sitting there alone in the blue glow of my phone screen, another memory came back. Then another. Thanksgiving at Vanessa's sister's house where I was. Told there was not enough room for one more guest. Lily's middle school choir concert that I somehow learned about 2 weeks after it happened. Christmas morning video calls that lasted less than 3 minutes before Vanessa always hurried everyone away. Tiny moments. Tiny exclusions. So small that confronting them would have sounded dramatic. But stacked together year after year, they formed something impossible to ignore. A pattern. I set the phone down carefully and stared into the dark fireplace. The truth arrived quietly. That was the cruelest part. There was no huge betrayal. No screaming argument. No single catastrophic moment. Just years of being slowly moved farther and farther away from the center of my own family until one day I realized I was standing completely outside of it. Around 1 in the morning, I heard the soft chime of another message. This time it was from Lily. "Happy birthday, Grandma. I am sorry." That was all she wrote. No emoji. No explanation. Just 7 words glowing against the darkness of my living room. I stared at the message for a very long time before typing back. "Thank you, sweetheart. Get some sleep." A few seconds later, 3 little dots appeared like she was typing again. Then they disappeared. Whatever she wanted to say, she did not say it. I leaned back slowly in Harold's chair and closed my eyes. The rain had finally stopped outside. Somewhere upstairs, the old pipes groaned softly inside the walls. The house sounded tired tonight. Maybe I did too. But for the first time in years, beneath the sadness and humiliation and loneliness, something else had begun settling quietly inside me. Clarity. The next morning, the house smelled faintly of cinnamon and cold coffee. I woke before sunrise the way older people often do, not because we are rested, but because sleep becomes lighter with age. For a few seconds, lying there beneath the heavy quilt Harold and I bought during our anniversary trip to Vermont, I forgot what day it was. Then I remembered the empty chairs. The untouched dinner. Vanessa smiling beneath restaurant lights, while my candles burned themselves into wax puddles. I stayed in bed longer than usual, staring at the pale morning light creeping across the ceiling. Somewhere downstairs, the heater clicked on with a low hum. The sound used to comfort me. This morning it only made the silence feel more obvious. By 7 o'clock, I was standing in the kitchen wearing my old cream-colored cardigan, warming leftover coffee in the microwave because I could not bring myself to brew a fresh pot just for myself. The refrigerator was still crowded with containers from the dinner nobody came to eat. I opened it and looked at the shelves for a moment before closing it again. Somehow the sight exhausted me. My phone buzzed while I stood at the sink. Daniel. For one foolish heartbeat, relief warmed my chest before I answered. "Good morning, Mom," he said casually, as if he had called on any ordinary Thursday. I waited. He did not mention the dinner. "Morning," I replied quietly. "How are you feeling today?" There was something distracted in his voice, like his attention was somewhere else entirely. I looked out the kitchen window at the wet maple trees lining the backyard. 70, I said softly. A short silence followed. Then he laughed awkwardly. "Right. About last night. Vanessa's birthday thing got bigger than we expected. Everything happened fast." I tightened my fingers around the coffee mug. Vanessa's birthday was next week. He knew I knew that. "I saw the photos," I said. Another silence. Longer this time. "Mom, do not do this." The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel exactly, but because of how tired he sounded. Like my hurt was an inconvenience he hoped to avoid before work. "Do what?" I asked calmly. "Make everything emotional. We were going to stop by this weekend anyway." Stop by. Like I was a neighbor recovering from surgery instead of his mother waiting alone on her 70th birthday. I closed my eyes briefly. Somewhere deep inside me, something fragile shifted. "I understand," I said. And strangely, I did. I understood more than he realized. After we hung up, I carried my coffee into the living room and sat near the front window. The neighborhood looked peaceful in the morning drizzle. A dog walker passed slowly down the sidewalk. Mrs. Patterson across the street struggled with her recycling bins while wearing pink slippers and a raincoat 2 sizes too big. Ordinary life continued moving as if nothing inside me had changed. But everything had. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Lily calling. I answered immediately. "Grandma?" Her voice sounded small. Young again somehow. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you mad at me?" The question cracked slightly in the middle, and suddenly I pictured her sitting alone in her bedroom, twisting the sleeve of her sweatshirt the way she always did when nervous. "No," I said gently. "Never at you." She exhaled softly on the other end. "I wanted to come yesterday." I stayed quiet. Mom said it would make things awkward if we left dinner early. There it was. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just another tiny truth finally slipping through the cracks. Awkward. I repeated carefully. Lily hesitated. She said you would probably cry and make everybody feel guilty. The room became very still around me. Outside, rainwater dripped slowly from the gutters. I stared at Harold's empty chair across the room while Lily continued speaking softly into the phone. I told Dad it was your birthday dinner first, but Mom said birthdays are not a big deal at your age anymore. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My hand rested quietly against the arm of the sofa while memories began rearranging themselves inside my mind like pieces finally clicking together. Vanessa insisting I skip Noah's soccer games because the weather would be too cold for me. Vanessa changing holiday plans at the last minute. Vanessa smiling sweetly while slowly removing me from every important family moment one polite excuse at a time. Grandma? Lily whispered nervously. I realized I had not answered. I am here, sweetheart. I am sorry. Her voice trembled now. I thought maybe Dad would say something, but he never does. That sentence hurt more than everything else combined. Because she was right. Daniel never did say anything. Not when Vanessa interrupted me mid-sentence at dinner tables. Not when she rolled her eyes after I spoke. Not when family plans somehow changed without anyone informing me until afterward. He stayed quiet. And silence, after enough years, becomes its own kind of agreement. Listen to me, I said softly. None of this is your fault. Lily sniffled quietly. Mom says you are lonely because you refused to move on after Grandpa died. I looked toward the fireplace where Harold's photograph still rested beside the clock. He was smiling in the picture, sunburned and happy during our last beach vacation together. Your grandfather was my husband for 46 years, I said carefully. You do not move on from that. You move forward with it. Lily did not answer immediately. Then very softly she whispered, I miss coming over. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Because I missed it too. The baking afternoons. The puzzle nights. Her small sneakers kicked off beside the front door while she sat cross-legged on my kitchen counter stealing cookie dough from the bowl. Somewhere along the way, those visits became fewer. Then rare. Then almost gone entirely. I love you, Grandma, she said suddenly, quickly, like someone afraid they might lose courage if they waited too long. Tears finally burned behind my eyes then, but I kept my voice steady. I love you too, sweetheart. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time staring out the rain-streaked window. The loneliness was still there. The hurt was still there too. But now it had shape. And once pain has a shape, you can finally begin to see it clearly. 3 days passed before Daniel and Vanessa finally came to the house. They arrived Sunday afternoon just after 2 o'clock, carrying a bakery box and a grocery store bouquet wrapped in stiff plastic. I saw their SUV pull into the driveway from the kitchen window while I stood peeling apples for a pie I suddenly no longer felt interested in baking. My first instinct was embarrassment. Not for them. For myself. Because some foolish part of me still felt relieved they had come at all. I dried my hands slowly on a dish towel and opened the front door before they could ring the bell. Vanessa smiled first. Bright. Polished. Effortless. She wore cream-colored boots and a camel coat that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. There she is, she said warmly, leaning forward to kiss the air near my cheek without actually touching me. Happy birthday, Eleanor. Eleanor. Not Mom. Never Mom. 15 years of marriage to my son, and she still said my name like we were distant coworkers at an office holiday party. Daniel stood behind her holding the cake box awkwardly in both hands. Hey, Mom. His smile looked tired. Guilty maybe, but not guilty enough. Come in, I said quietly. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and coffee. Vanessa glanced around immediately the way she always did, silently inspecting things. Her eyes drifted over the hardwood floors Harold refinished himself 20 years ago, the antique clock beside the staircase, the framed watercolor painting near the fireplace. She never looked at this house with affection. Only assessment. This place is always so spotless, she said while removing her gloves. I do not know how you keep up with all this at your age. At your age. There it was again. Those tiny little comments wrapped carefully in politeness. I used to wonder if I imagined them. Now I heard every word clearly. You learn to pace yourself, I replied calmly. Daniel cleared his throat. We brought cake. That is thoughtful. Vanessa smiled wider. Triple chocolate. Lily picked it. The mention of Lily softened something in me despite myself. I led them into the dining room where sunlight spilled weakly through the windows across the polished table. The same table where empty plates had sat untouched 3 nights earlier. Vanessa placed the flowers down carefully and glanced toward the kitchen. You cooked. Just pie. Oh good, she laughed lightly. Because after all that food at the restaurant Thursday night, I told Daniel I could not possibly eat another heavy meal. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her. She did not notice. Or maybe she did and simply did not care. We sat in the living room with coffee while Vanessa talked almost non-stop about renovations they were planning for their house. New countertops. Expanded closets. Heated bathroom floors. I listened quietly while Daniel stared into his mug most of the time. Every now and then he glanced at me like he wanted to say something else, but never quite found the courage. Then Vanessa crossed one elegant leg over the other and sighed dramatically. Honestly, homes are just becoming impossible to maintain these days. My stomach tightened slightly. Especially for older people, she continued casually. Even my mother keeps talking about downsizing. There it was. I remained very still. This house has a lot of stairs, Daniel added carefully, still not meeting my eyes. We just worry about you here alone. Worry. Such a gentle word for something that suddenly felt very calculated. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug to steady them. I manage fine. Vanessa tilted her head sympathetically. For now, sure. But eventually everybody needs help. There is no shame in planning ahead. Planning ahead. I noticed then that Daniel had gone quiet in the specific way he always did when Vanessa was steering a conversation exactly where she wanted it to go. Actually, she continued smoothly, one of my coworkers just moved her father into a beautiful assisted living community near Hartford. It is really more like a resort than a nursing home. Nursing home. The words settled heavily into the room. Harold's chair sat across from me near the fireplace, empty as always now. Suddenly I remembered something Lily had said during our phone call. Mom says you are lonely because you refused to move on after Grandpa died. I looked at Vanessa sitting there in her expensive coat, discussing my future like she was organizing furniture delivery. She smiled kindly while doing it. That was the unsettling part. Cruel people are easier to recognize when they shout. Vanessa never shouted. She erased people softly. I am not moving into a nursing home, I said evenly. Vanessa laughed lightly. Oh goodness, nobody said tomorrow. But her eyes flickered briefly toward Daniel. A tiny glance. Quick enough most people would miss it. I did not. Daniel finally spoke up. Mom, we just think maybe it is time to simplify things a little. Simplify things. I almost smiled at the phrase. Because what he really meant was easier. Easier for them. Easier if the house was sold. Easier if I became smaller. Quieter. Easier to manage from a distance. Vanessa leaned forward gently. You deserve to enjoy your life now instead of worrying about maintenance and repairs. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I asked quietly, and what exactly would happen to this house? Silence. Brief. But revealing. Daniel looked down first. Vanessa answered instead. Well, obviously selling it would make the most financial sense eventually. Eventually. Another careful word. Harold bought this house when Daniel was 8 years old. We planted every tree in the backyard together. We painted the kitchen yellow because morning light made the whole room glow like warm honey. This was not an asset. It was our life. And sitting there across from me, I realized something with absolute clarity. They were no longer waiting for me to disappear naturally. They were already preparing for it. After Daniel and Vanessa left that afternoon, the silence inside the house felt different again. Not painful this time. Sharper. Like a fog had finally lifted from a road I had been driving blind for years. I stood at the front window and watched their SUV disappear around the corner while the bouquet they brought sat untouched on the entryway table beside me. Bright orange roses wrapped in stiff plastic. Grocery store flowers chosen in a hurry by people trying to perform guilt instead of feeling it. I did not throw them away immediately. I simply walked past them for the rest of the evening without touching them once. Around 5 o'clock, I reheated a bowl of soup and sat alone in the kitchen while rain clouds gathered outside again. Connecticut autumns always carried a kind of quiet sadness to them. The trees behind the backyard fence had already turned deep shades of amber and rust, and wet leaves clung to the deck Harold built with Daniel one summer when he was still in high school. I could still picture them out there arguing over measurements, while classic rock played through the garage radio. Back then, Daniel used to come home from college and immediately head for the refrigerator looking for leftovers. "Nobody cooks like Mom," he would say proudly to his friends. Funny how quickly people forget the hands that fed them once someone newer begins setting the table. I washed my soup bowl slowly and stared out the kitchen window while another memory surfaced unexpectedly. 2 years earlier, after my knee surgery, Vanessa insisted I should give Daniel spare keys to the house in case of emergencies. At the time it sounded reasonable, thoughtful even. But suddenly I remembered how quickly she started making comments afterward. "This place could sell for a fortune now. The market out here is unbelievable. You do not really use the upstairs anymore anyway." Little observations dropped casually into conversation like breadcrumbs leading somewhere I had never wanted to look. My phone buzzed on the counter. "Lily again. Are you busy?" she texted. "No, sweetheart." A moment later my phone rang. "Hi, Grandma." Her voice sounded quieter than usual. I could hear muffled television noise somewhere behind her. "Hi, honey." She hesitated. "Did Mom and Dad come over today?" "They did." Another pause. "Were they talking about the house again?" I leaned slowly against the kitchen counter. "What do you mean again?" Silence. Then a nervous exhale. "Nothing." My chest tightened slightly. "Lily." She lowered her voice immediately. "Please do not tell them I said anything." A cold heaviness settled into my stomach. "Tell me what, sweetheart?" I heard a door close softly on her end, followed by footsteps. She was moving somewhere private. "A few weeks ago I heard Mom talking to Dad in their room," she whispered. She thought I was asleep. I gripped the edge of the counter harder without realizing it. "What did she say?" Lily hesitated again. "She said if you moved into assisted living they could refinance this house and finally get the lake property Dad wanted." For a second, the kitchen seemed to tilt around me. Not because of the money. Not even because of the house itself. But because suddenly every conversation, every careful suggestion, every rehearsed expression of concern snapped into place with horrifying clarity. "Dad did not really answer," Lily continued softly. "But he did not say no either." That hurt most of all. Daniel's silence. Always the silence. "Then Mom said you were lonely. Enough now that eventually you would agree to anything if they framed it as helping you." I closed my eyes. "Helping you?" Such a gentle phrase for something that suddenly felt predatory. Rain began tapping lightly against the kitchen windows again. Slow. Steady. "Grandma?" Lily's voice trembled slightly now. "Are you okay?" I opened my eyes and looked around the kitchen. Harold and I built together piece by piece over 4 decades. The yellow ceramic bowl we bought at a flea market in Vermont. The faded curtains I sewed myself when Daniel was 12. The old clock above the pantry that always ran 3 minutes fast no matter how many times Harold tried fixing it. This house was not just property. It was evidence that my life had mattered. "I am all right," I said quietly. And strangely, I was. Because once somebody finally shows you who they are, confusion disappears. Pain remains. But confusion leaves. After the call ended, I walked upstairs slowly toward the bedroom Harold and I shared for 46 years. The hallway creaked softly beneath my feet the same way it always had. At the end of the hall sat the small cedar chest where Harold kept all our important papers organized in careful manila folders labeled with his precise handwriting. Insurance, taxes, investments, trust documents. Harold believed in preparation. "Life gets messy enough without leaving paperwork behind," he always said. I knelt beside the chest and lifted the lid slowly. The scent of cedar drifted upward immediately, warm and familiar. For several moments I simply stared at the folders without touching them. Then finally, very carefully, I reached for the one labeled estate planning. My hands no longer trembled now. That surprised me. A week ago, I would have cried. 3 days ago, I would have made excuses for them. But sitting there on the bedroom floor with rain whispering softly against the roof above me, I realized something important. Vanessa had mistaken kindness for weakness, and Daniel had mistaken my silence for blindness. They both forgot something very dangerous. I might have been 70 years old, but I was still the woman who survived burying the love of her life and learning how to breathe afterward. The next morning, I called Harold's attorney, not because I wanted revenge, and not because I wanted to punish my son. I called because for the first time in years, I finally understood the difference between being loved and being managed. His name was Martin Keller, and he had handled our family's legal matters for nearly 30 years. Harold trusted him completely. If anything ever happens to me, Harold used to say, call Martin before you call anybody else. Back then, I laughed every time he said it. Now those words echoed differently inside my mind. Martin answered on the second ring. His voice sounded older than I remembered, roughened slightly by age, but still calm and measured. Eleanor, he said warmly after I introduced myself. How are you holding up these days? Such a simple question. Yet somehow it nearly broke my heart because he genuinely wanted the answer. I have been better, I admitted softly. Silence settled briefly between us before he spoke again. Would you like to come by the office? Yes, I said. I think it is time. His office sat downtown near the old brick courthouse, inside a narrow 3-story building with dark wood trim and brass door handles polished from decades of use. Harold and I had walked through those same doors countless times over the years. Estate paperwork, property taxes, retirement planning. The ordinary business of building a life together slowly and responsibly. The receptionist recognized me immediately when I stepped inside that afternoon. Mrs. Whitmore, she said gently, standing from behind the desk. It is good to see you again. I smiled politely and removed my gloves. Outside, the autumn air had turned sharp enough to sting my cheeks during the walk from the parking lot. Thank you, dear. Martin came out personally to greet me a moment later. He looked older too, thinner around the shoulders, silver-haired now, but his handshake remained steady. Eleanor. There was genuine kindness in his eyes when he said my name. He led me into his office where the same leather chairs still sat near the window overlooking Main Street. Harold always preferred the chair on the left because afternoon sunlight reached it first. Funny the things grief remembers. Martin poured coffee for both of us before sitting down behind his desk. Tell me what is going on. I looked down at my hands for a moment. At the wedding ring I still wore despite Harold being gone 3 years now. Then slowly, carefully, I told him everything. The birthday dinner, the empty chairs, the restaurant photos, Vanessa's conversations about assisted living, the house, the refinance plans, Lily overhearing things she never should have needed to hear at 16 years old. Martin listened quietly without interrupting once. That alone made me realize how long it had been since anyone truly listened to me. When I finished speaking, he removed his glasses slowly and leaned back in his chair. Harold worried about this, he said quietly. My eyes lifted immediately. What do you mean? Martin folded his hands together carefully. Toward the end of his illness, he became concerned about how dependent Daniel was becoming on Vanessa's opinions. I stared at him. Harold never said anything to me, because he hoped he was wrong. Martin sighed softly. But he made several changes to the trust before he passed. A strange heaviness settled in my chest. Changes? Martin reached into a folder beside him and pulled out several documents neatly clipped together. Your home and primary assets were placed into a protected family trust controlled entirely by you while you remain mentally competent. He paused briefly before continuing. Harold specifically included provisions preventing forced property liquidation or involuntary placement into assisted care without independent medical evaluation and your direct consent. I stared at the papers in silence. Harold knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to prepare for it quietly without frightening me while he was dying. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Even gone, that man was still trying to protect me. There is more, Martin added gently. If any immediate family member attempts financial coercion related to your housing or medical autonomy, they can be removed entirely as beneficiaries. I blinked slowly. Harold wrote that? Martin nodded once. About 6 months before he passed. For several seconds, I could not speak. Outside the office window, people moved along the sidewalks carrying shopping bags and coffee cups, while traffic lights changed steadily through the gray afternoon. Ordinary life continued moving while my entire understanding of the last 3 years quietly rearranged itself again. He saw things I did not, I whispered. Martin's expression softened. Sometimes the people who love us most notice danger before we are ready to. I looked down at the documents again. The pages felt heavier than paper somehow. Not because of money, but because they represented something I had almost forgotten I deserved. Protection. Dignity. Choice. Martin cleared his throat gently. Eleanor, I need to ask you something difficult. I looked up. Do you believe your son would intentionally harm you financially? The question sat heavily between us. I thought about Daniel at age 8 helping Harold rake leaves into giant piles every fall. Daniel at 16 driving 3 hours home from college just to surprise me on Mother's Day. Daniel crying quietly beside me at Harold's funeral. Then I thought about the silence. The excuses. The empty chairs. The conversations behind closed doors while they waited for me to become easier to move aside. I think I said slowly, my son became the kind of man who lets other people decide who matters. Martin nodded sadly, as though that answer did not surprise him at all. Then very calmly, I straightened my shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. I want to make changes to the trust. Martin did not look surprised when I said I wanted to change the trust. If anything, he looked relieved. He opened a legal pad slowly and adjusted his glasses while afternoon light stretched across the office floor in long pale stripes. Tell me what you are thinking, he said calmly. For a moment, I stared at Harold's signature near the bottom of the documents resting between us. Even his handwriting looked steady. Reliable. The kind of handwriting that belonged to a man who fixed broken cabinet doors before anyone had to ask him twice. I swallowed carefully before answering. I do not want Daniel removed completely. Saying that out loud hurt more than I expected. Because despite everything, he was still my son. Love does not disappear simply because disappointment arrives. Sometimes they live side by side for years. Martin nodded quietly, waiting. But I want safeguards, I continued. Real ones. He folded his hands together. What kind of safeguards? I took a slow breath. The house stays protected. Permanently. No sale unless I personally approve it while fully competent. Martin wrote several notes down immediately. And if pressure or coercion occurs? Then the property transfers elsewhere entirely. My own voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. Martin looked up briefly. Elsewhere meaning? I thought about Lily sitting alone whispering apologies into her phone. Lily who still remembered how to feel guilty. Lily who still called me grandma with warmth instead of obligation. A trust for Lily's education and future. Martin's expression softened slightly. I think Harold would have liked that. For the first time that afternoon, I smiled faintly. I think so too. We spent nearly 2 hours reviewing paperwork together. Investments. Savings accounts. Property protections. Medical directives. Things I once assumed families naturally handled with honesty and care now felt strangely dangerous in the wrong hands. At one point, Martin leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. Eleanor, he said gently, I need to ask something difficult again. All right. Why now? I looked at him quietly. Because I finally understand that people do not slowly erase you by accident. The office fell silent after that. Outside the courthouse windows, leaves skittered across the sidewalks beneath gusts of cold October wind. Somewhere downstairs, I could hear the faint ringing of telephones and distant footsteps moving through the building. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary day. Yet, somehow it felt like the first honest day I had lived in years. Before I left, Martin handed me a slim folder containing temporary copies of the revised documents. Everything will be finalized by Friday, he explained. And Eleanor? I paused near the office door. You are allowed to protect yourself without apologizing for it. Those words followed me all the way home. The sky had already begun darkening when I pulled into my driveway. The old maple trees lining the street swayed gently beneath the wind while porch lights flickered on one house at a time across the neighborhood. Home. For the first time in a long while, the word no longer filled me with grief. It filled me with resolve. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and cinnamon. I hung my coat carefully near the front door and carried the folder upstairs to the bedroom. Harold's side of the closet still held several of his old sweaters hanging untouched near the back. Sometimes I opened the closet just to breathe in the fading scent of his cologne trapped inside the fabric. Tonight, instead of crying, I reached for the navy blue cardigan he used to wear on cold Sunday mornings and draped it gently across the bed while I organized the paperwork inside the cedar chest. Then my phone rang downstairs. I almost ignored it until I saw Lily's name glowing across the screen. "Hi, sweetheart." "Grandma?" Her voice sounded nervous again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." A pause followed. "Are you mad at Dad?" I lowered myself slowly into the armchair beside the fireplace. The house creaked softly around me while wind rattled bare branches outside. "I am hurt," I answered carefully. "That is different." Lily stayed quiet for several seconds. "Mom has been acting weird all day." "Weird how?" "She keeps asking Dad if he talked to you yet." My eyes narrowed slightly. "Talk to me about what?" "I do not know." She hesitated. "But I heard her say they should move fast before you change your mind." A cold stillness settled inside my chest then. Move fast. As though I were paperwork waiting to be processed instead of a person still fully alive and listening. "Did your father say anything?" "Not really." Her voice softened. "He just looked tired." I closed my eyes briefly. Daniel always did look tired lately. Tired men become easy to lead, easy to silence, easy to convince that peace matters more than courage. "Grandma?" Lily whispered again. "You are not going anywhere, right?" I opened my eyes and looked around the living room Harold built for our family, one paycheck at a time. The stone fireplace, the faded piano in the corner, the family photos lining the shelves, frozen snapshots from years when love still looked uncomplicated. "No," I said quietly. "Not unless I choose to." After we hung up, I sat there for a very long time watching shadows deepen across the room. Then slowly, without hesitation, I reached for my phone and opened the family group chat for the first time in months. My fingers moved calmly across the screen. "Family dinner next Sunday. 6 o'clock. I would love everyone here." I stared at the message for a moment before pressing send. Almost immediately, Vanessa responded with a heart emoji and the words, "Would not miss it." I looked at her reply and finally understood something clearly. She still believed I was the same lonely old woman waiting beside untouched birthday candles for scraps of attention. She had no idea the waiting was over. Sunday arrived colder than expected. The kind of October cold that settled into the windows overnight and made the hardwood floors sting beneath bare feet in the morning. I woke before sunrise again, but this time the heaviness inside me felt different. Focused. Calm. The dining room looked exactly the way it had 1 week earlier, yet everything about me had changed since then. I set the table slowly just after noon. 8 plates. 8 glasses. 8 folded cloth napkins. Only this time, I did not place name cards beside the seats. I no longer needed reminders of who belonged where. By 3 o'clock, the house smelled like roast chicken, garlic butter, and fresh thyme. A pot of soup simmered quietly on the stove while soft jazz played low through the kitchen radio. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary dinner. Yet beneath the calm, I could feel something final approaching. Around 4:30, I carried the blue folder Martin prepared downstairs and placed it carefully inside the drawer of Harold's old buffet cabinet in the dining room. Not hidden. Simply waiting. Outside, wind pushed loose leaves across the backyard deck while gray clouds thickened overhead. At 5:50, headlights appeared through the front windows. Right on time. That alone almost made me laugh. I opened the door before they rang the bell. Vanessa smiled immediately, polished and warm as always. "Something smells amazing." Daniel stood beside her carrying a bottle of wine while Noah scrolled absently through his phone near the driveway. Lily met my eyes first. There was worry in hers. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, sweetheart." I hugged her gently before stepping aside to let everyone enter. The house suddenly filled with noise again. Coats draped over chairs. Shoes against hardwood floors. Vanessa complimenting the centerpiece on the dining table while Daniel adjusted the thermostat without asking, exactly the way Harold used to do. For one dangerous moment, the scene almost felt normal enough to hurt. We sat down for dinner shortly after 6. Vanessa talked cheerfully through most of the meal about holiday plans and school schedules, while Daniel nodded along distractedly beside her. Noah barely looked up from his phone except to ask for more mashed potatoes twice. Lily stayed quiet. Every now and then, I caught her watching me carefully across the table like she sensed something the others did not. I listened politely while serving food. Calm. Measured. Almost peaceful. That seemed to confuse Vanessa most of all. Halfway through dinner, she finally leaned back in her chair and smiled sweetly at me. You seem really good tonight, Eleanor. Eleanor again. Always Eleanor. I am, I replied simply. Daniel glanced toward me briefly. That is good, Mom. Mom. Funny how he only remembered the word when guilt entered the room. Vanessa lifted her wine glass lightly. Honestly, I think getting everybody together more often would be healthy for you. Healthy for me. The phrase nearly made me smile. I agree, I said quietly. Then I stood up from the table. The room shifted subtly as every conversation stopped. I walked calmly toward the buffet cabinet and opened the drawer. Behind me, silverware clinked softly against plates while nobody spoke. I returned to the table holding the blue folder in both hands. Daniel frowned immediately. What is that? I sat back down. Carefully before answering. Something important. Vanessa's expression sharpened for only a fraction of a second before smoothing itself again. Should we be worried? She laughed lightly. No, I said. Only informed. Then slowly, without rushing, I opened the folder and removed the documents inside. The room became very still. Even Noah finally looked up from his phone. Last week taught me something difficult, I said calmly. I realized I spent a long time confusing proximity with love. Nobody interrupted. Vanessa's smile had started fading now around the edges. After your grandfather passed away, I continued while looking toward Lily briefly. I kept thinking loneliness meant I needed people more desperately. But loneliness can also make you ignore things you should never ignore. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside his wine glass. Mom, what is this about? I met his eyes fully then. The house. Silence. Immediate. Heavy. Vanessa recovered first. Eleanor, nobody is trying to pressure you. Really? I asked softly. Because Lily overheard both of you discussing assisted living and refinancing this property before I had even agreed to anything. Vanessa went completely still. Daniel's face drained of color. Beside them, Lily lowered her eyes toward her plate. Mom, Daniel said quickly, it was not like that. I looked at him quietly. Then explain it to me. He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Vanessa jumped in smoothly. We were concerned about your future. That is all. My future, I repeated carefully. Or your lake house? Daniel stared at the table now. That was answer enough. Outside, wind rattled softly against the dining room windows while nobody moved. Finally, I slid the papers slowly across the table toward them. The trust has been revised. Vanessa's eyes dropped immediately to the documents. I watched the exact moment she understood. Her entire body stiffened slightly before she forced herself still again. What does this mean? She asked carefully. It means this house cannot be sold, transferred, refinanced, or used financially without my direct consent while fully competent. I paused briefly. And if coercion is attempted, all property interest transfers elsewhere entirely. Daniel looked up sharply then. Elsewhere. I folded my hands calmly together atop the table. Most of my estate will now be protected for Lily. The silence afterward felt almost sacred. Vanessa's face had gone pale beneath the dining room light. Daniel stared at me like he no longer recognized the woman sitting across from him. But the strangest part was this. For the first time in years, I finally recognized myself. For several seconds after I finished speaking, nobody moved. The dining room sat wrapped in complete silence except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. Tick, tick, tick. Funny how the smallest sounds become unbearable when truth finally enters a room. Vanessa recovered first, of course. She always did. Her posture straightened slightly, and that polished smile returned to her face with almost professional precision. "Eleanor," she said softly, "I think there has been a terrible misunderstanding." I looked at her calmly across the table. "Has there?" She folded her hands neatly together beside her wine glass. "Everything Daniel and I discussed was about making sure you were cared for." Cared for. Another beautiful phrase twisted into something hollow. Daniel still had not spoken. He sat staring at the trust documents like they had been written in another language entirely. "You talked about me like I was already gone," I said quietly. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly then. "That is not fair." "No," I replied gently. "What happened on my birthday was not fair." Daniel finally looked up. His eyes appeared tired again. Older somehow. "Mom, we messed up." The room became still once more. Because those 4 words were probably the closest thing to honesty I had heard from him in years. Vanessa turned toward him immediately. "Daniel." A warning hidden inside one word. But this time he did not look at her. He looked at me. "We should have come that night." I held his gaze quietly. "You should have wanted to." His face tightened slightly at that. Across the table, Noah shifted awkwardly in his seat while Lily stared down at her folded napkin. Children always know when adults are finally saying things that should have been said long ago. Vanessa inhaled carefully before trying again. "Eleanor, I understand why you are emotional right now. Do not do that," Daniel interrupted suddenly. Everybody looked at him in surprise, including me. Vanessa blinked. "Do what?" "Talk to her like she is confused." His voice was quiet, but firm enough that even the air inside the room seemed to change. Vanessa stared at him for a moment, clearly stunned. Then came something I had not seen from her before. Irritation. Real irritation slipping through the polished mask. "I have spent years trying to help this family," she said sharply. "Have you?" I asked softly. She turned toward me immediately. "Excuse me?" I folded my hands together calmly on the table exactly the way Harold used to during difficult conversations. "You isolated me slowly enough that everybody could pretend it was accidental." Her expression hardened. "That is ridiculous." "Is it?" I asked. "Christmas dinners, school events, holidays, birthdays. Somehow there was always a reason I should stay home." Daniel rubbed a hand across his forehead heavily. "Vanessa," but now the dam had cracked slightly, and even she seemed unable to stop herself fully. "You always made everything heavy," she snapped quietly. There it was. Finally. Not polished. Not hidden beneath fake concern or careful smiles. The truth. "Mom," Lily whispered immediately, horrified. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly like she regretted saying it out loud. But it was too late now. Some words cannot be gathered back once released. I remained completely still. Strangely, hearing the truth hurt less than years of pretending. "Heavy," I repeated softly. Vanessa looked away first. Daniel stared at her in open disbelief now. "You told Lily her grandmother ruins gatherings?" She crossed her arms defensively. "I was trying to protect the atmosphere around the kids." The atmosphere. As though I were smoke drifting into a room instead of family. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair like somebody had physically exhausted him. For a long moment, nobody spoke again. Then Noah quietly pushed his phone aside and looked at me. "Grandma?" His voice sounded small. "I did not know it was your birthday dinner." Vanessa turned sharply toward him. "Noah." But he continued anyway. "Mom said we were surprising her because she had a hard week." Another silence followed. A different one this time. Not tense. Exposing. Piece by piece, the carefully managed version of reality Vanessa built around this family had started collapsing beneath its own weight. I looked at my grandson and smiled gently. "It is all right, sweetheart." But across the table, Daniel looked devastated. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just deeply, quietly ashamed. And for the first time in years, I think he finally understood what his silence had cost. Outside, rain had started falling again against the windows. Soft. Steady. Familiar. Lily suddenly stood from her chair and walked around the table toward me. Without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around my shoulders gently from behind. I covered her hand softly with mine. Vanessa watched the moment with an unreadable expression, while Daniel lowered his eyes toward his untouched plate. "I am not taking your house," he said quietly after a long pause. I looked at him carefully. "That decision was made the moment you stopped defending me inside my own family." His eyes filled slightly then, though he blinked the emotion away quickly. Harold used to say regret arrives late because pride always insists on driving first. Looking at my son sitting there beneath the warm dining room lights, I finally understood exactly what he meant. I stood slowly from the table and began gathering plates one at a time. No dramatic speeches. No screaming. No revenge. Just the quiet sound of dishes being cleared after a meal nobody would ever forget. Lily immediately stood to help me. Noah followed a moment later. Only Vanessa remained seated. Daniel watched me carry the plates toward the kitchen, and for the first time since Harold died, he looked at me not like a problem to solve or a responsibility to manage. He looked at me like a mother again. But by then, something inside me had already changed. Because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. And some empty chairs stay empty long after people finally decide to come home.